Level 2 of core stability consists of resisting gravity and or external forces. On top 3 exercises, you can see the important movement, and this is rollout movement. Rollout is extremely important movement, starting with under 13, 14, 15 players. Why? Because rollout is excellent methodical tool to create better core stability for example, push-up. I would like all of my young players to be able to perform single correct push-up with good body position. I think it's very important. That is one of those minimum standards especially for under 15, but also for much younger players. So if I have players who have problem with performing proper push-up in some kind of repetitions, in that case, it's very important to implement some kind of rollout exercise. Why? To create habit of activation proper muscles when I do something with my arms in this case. But it's going to be beneficial for all areas of core stability. In lower level, here you can see, for example, low left exercise in which the player has the goal to write his own name with his foot. So this is something that's fun, this is something that's beneficial for core stability, and this is something that's easy to understand and sometimes not so easy to do depending on the length of your name. And then you as a coach can make up some new assignments or new words that your players have to write with your foot or with your arm. For example, lower middle, you can see the also not 4-position plank but 3-position plank. This is something that's very important. At this level, we don't need to talk about plank, the basic plank. We can talk about 3-position plank and how beneficial it is. Also because 3-position plank is something that's a little bit randomized, not programmed. Basic plank, 4-point plank is maybe too programmed, especially for higher level of players. Of course, in all of these exercises, you can put in also some ball work. So down to the right, you can see the combination of plank in 3 positions with addition to the ball and some football movement. Another part of level 2, we are still at the same level, resisting gravity and external forces, and now we are getting up a little bit. Of course, here up on the right, you see only one of many options of side planks which can be beneficial for core stability. You already know, I'm sure, a lot of them. On top left and middle, you see anti-rotation and anti-lateral flexion exercises, very important exercises. If you analyze, for example, agility, what is agility? What is the demand of agility for core? Is demand of agility for core to create movement or to resist previous direction and to have the same position? I think it's this, to resist previous direction and to maintain the same position, and in order to do that it has to be very, very active. So anti-rotational exercises, in this case, for example, this is Pallof press, the up on the left, and up in the middle, anti-lateral flexion, important exercises to create player who has good agility. This is level 0 of agility, for example. Of course, if you want to take it a step further, you can go to lower and the left exercise and low to the right, which are also anti-rotational and anti-lateral flexion, but not programmed as you saw up. These are random exercises. Why? Because football is a random game. So another important thing in core training philosophy, not only core training, in every part of philosophy, is to have good variability in exercises which are programmed and randomized. If you do only programmed, it's not easy to have good transformation to the pitch. If you do only randomized, you are missing the basic activation. So variability is key word for many methods, and it's a key word for probably success in strength and conditioning in football. Another example of level 2 exercises, this time with the ball, and different types of activities, different levels of intensity, but as you can see, the basic idea is the same, and now you can make up your own 100 new exercises. Why? Because it's not about exercise, it's only about idea. If you know what you want to do, it's very easy to imagine and create new exercises, new ways. So the idea of this lecture is maybe to give you some new ideas, to confirm some old ideas which are good, and to provoke you a little bit to think on your own and to create your own ways how to develop something. In this case, how to develop even better pre-warm-up session. Level 3 is actually creating movement. Even though here you can see exercises in which there is not a lot of movement, but I wanted to show you this on the left 3 exercises, chop and lift movement, which is very important, and you can do it without movement of the core or the trunk, and you can do it with movement of the core and trunk, and you have different options. So level 3 is creating movement, and in creation of movement it's very important to do it in rotation. That's the most important movement for creation. Everything else is even more important to be able to resist some forces. When we talk about movement, rotation is the key, as you can see on the right, one of course 1,000 ways to create force in rotation, in this case with elastic band. Scapular stability is connected, if you remember from 26 minutes ago, with thoracic mobility, and scapular stability plus thoracic mobility gives you proper upper spine posture. So combining those 6 exercises in one row, you remember from the laying position, from rolling to passive mobility to active mobility, you combine this with scapular stability, and there is a good chance that these exercises, total of 11 exercises, are solving 80% of upper back postural problems. So these are some of the exercises. Some of them are performed on the floor. Some of them are, some of them are performed on the floor, and some of them are performed standing up. Here you can see external rotation as one of the most important movements for scapular stability, and you can see the combination of maybe lower stance and upper stance, maybe single leg stance, which is very important in order to transform this ability of scapular stability to the pitch. Knee stability, very important thing, and you already know many things when we talk about hamstring activation. Here you see exercises which are maybe something between activation and strength, and there's a thin line between activation and strength. Some of you and some of us think that lower to the left exercise is more strength than activation, but this is something to think about. I just wanted to give you options and maybe to play with this line between activation and strength. Of course, there are many more intensive exercises. We can use some isoinertial tools. We can use many things to improve strength and power. In this lecture, I wanted to stay on this lower level of intensity, but very important intensity and very important types of exercises. But in future, we can think about using some other tools and other methods also in this pre-warm-up session, not only in team strength training or power training, but also in pre-warm-up session. Why? Because of that potentiation, because of that activation and innervation, to be able to perform on the pitch and to use time and to accumulate effects during the whole season. Of course, hamstring activation, eccentric activation has to be emphasized. These are some of the typical exercises for that. Important part of hamstring activation is to consider not only movement in the knee but also movement in the hip, because the hamstring muscle group does different things and you have to address different things, of course, in this activation. So, as I said, for hamstring area, it's important to have good combination of optimal flexibility and optimal strength. So this is something that needs to be considered and something that needs to be re-examined often to create smarter individual training protocols. Another part of knee stability is gluteus maximus, gluteus medius activation. Here on this slide, you see the gluteus medius activation with few exercises with mini band around the knees. So first two exercises are on the floor with mini band, and the last one is with mini band. The up on the right is important exercise which can be performed also on the pitch, and it's good for gluteus medius activation, but it's in quadruple position. This is not specific, so we need to get up, and one of those interesting exercises is down on the left, as you can see, and it's called slow step up, and it's very good exercise for gluteus medius activation, and it's performed standing up and doing the step up, but with different demands. When we continue to gluteus medius, to do it a little bit in more dynamic environment, as you can see up on the left, and to do it with even more speed, as you can see down and left, it's also very important to create these kind of progressions. So there is many ways to achieve progression. We talked about body position, from the floor to sitting, kneeling, standing. We can talk about speed, different speeds. We can talk about different muscle group activities. We can talk about many things. Now, if we talk about for 5 minutes, we can find 50 ways to create some kind of progression. So this is one of the examples of creating progressions when you consider speed. When we talk about gluteus maximus, these are two basic ways of gluteus maximus activation. Both are hip thrusts, modified hip thrusts, and this is also one of the exercises that is flirting a little bit with strength. So there's again thin line between the hip thrust that you can see here on the big ball and additional weight that you can put on your hips to perform hip thrust, but it's very important exercise for gluteus maximus activation in pre-warm-up. Continuing with knee stability. As we said, knee stability is a very, very important part of injury prevention and performance. Here we can see different squatting variations and different quad activations. Of course, when you do squat, you have activation of many muscles, and proper squatting technique is something that's very important. Just like it's very important to have proper deadlift technique. So deadlift and squat are considered extremely important motor control knowledge or skill for very, very young players. Because if I want them to sprint, if I want them to jump, why not teaching them proper squat and proper deadlift? Why not teaching proper deadlift to elementary school? I think the best physical education class in school can be performed in school hall. Why? Because you have the wall. You have the wall, and sometimes wall is enough to teach young kids how to use their hips in hip hinge movement and how to use hips in lowering your center of gravity, which is very, very, very important skill for everybody, not only for football players, but for general population. I would like my grandmother to have skill of hip hinge or deadlift. Now this sounds maybe a little bit funny, but she needs that, because if she has good hip hinge, That means she's saving her joints and she's activating her muscles. So good muscle activation is sometimes a consequence of proper mechanics, and these two, muscle activation and proper mechanics, are always here in the same place, and they can't be without one another. So proper squatting mechanics. Here you can see some bilateral and some unilateral squats, some maybe a little bit different exercises, such as this one down on the right. All of these exercises are very, very important in order to have good knee stability, especially for those players who have previous history of injuries. Continuation of these kind of exercises, quad activation and different squat variations. Here you can see again some of the bilateral, some unilateral exercises. All of them have similar goals, and you can use them and play with them, play with variations of them in order to have a successful pre-warm-up program. Balance and foot stability, there are many ways you can do balance exercises in place. You can do it in movement. Here I chose to show a little bit more exercises in place because the pitch is maybe area where you can do dynamic stability for balance. And in my experience, I like to do this only few minutes per session. I think it's enough to create optimal acute effect and optimal innervation even for the training that's coming. Here you can see different head movement, which makes exercises a little bit more difficult. You can also use eyes closed. You can play with many things in this area and to create something that's optimally difficult for your players. Especially in this area, it's important to have optimally difficult exercise. If exercise is too easy, it doesn't make sense. If it's too hard, also it doesn't make sense. So optimal difficulty of balancing exercise is something that's very important for this part of program to be successful. Here you can see some other exercises, combination of balance and foot stability, which can be, of course, applied into your pre-warm-up session. So next we see certain combo movements. These are movements that involve more muscle groups at the same time, and this can be excellent finishing part of pre-warm-up. We talked about potentiation a lot in this lecture. In this example, only 4 exercises, but there is numerous possibilities to choose from. In these 4 exercises, you can see the activation of more muscle groups and sometimes in a little bit more explosive way, which is very important for potentiation and for innervation to start the team training session in proper way. Some additional pre-performance concept options to consider in future is to involve a little bit of more strength training in these type of sessions, to involve a more power training, of course, very smart and very individually programmed, very important thing, and also movement mechanics, depending on the demands and depending on certain deficits for the players. So these are some of the topics to consider for future pre-warm-up session implementation. How to run this kind of pre-warm-up? I intentionally put in the first environment. It's very important to create proper environment, optimistic and positive environment in which is normal for players to be motivated for this type of work. That's why second point here is motivation. So these two are in good combination. Environment and motivation, they come together. Of course, your job is to control this type of session. It's not easy to control many players at the same time. For this, your players need to be educated considering the proper technique, proper discipline, of course, proper mentality. It's very important for implementation of this kind of work. And of course, your job is to do some type of corrections depending on the need and depending on your players. Another part of practical application is this table. This table shows some, it's not recipes, it's just suggestions, how to deal with certain parameters when you talk about pre-warm-up. So here you see a number of exercises for each of those, as you remember, 8 phases of complete warm-up, which can be all performed in pre-warm-up. And here you see some suggestions, considering number of exercises, number of reps, duration, number of sets, intensity, considering force and tempo, rests between reps or sets. So these are just some basic guidelines for performing this type of work. Now I want to show you 2 examples, very short videos of practical implementation of all of these strategies that I discussed. These are only 2 examples from Croatian national team, and here you can see different segments or different parts of what we talked about in this lecture. Also, you can see that even though it's really individualized, even players have ability or freedom to choose to do something even more fun in this type of pre-warm-up session. So not only to do the exact program or protocol that I prescribed or that they have the habit to do, but also to prepare mentally for the training sessions, they can do something that's even more interesting, something that's even more playful. So to conclude and to summarize, I think it's important to create your own philosophy. I think it's important to create your own sections of or segments of this type of work, of pre-warm-up work, and to fill in those drawers with some ideas. Ideas are crucial. If you have a good idea, you can find new ways, you can find new interesting exercises. I try to show you 20% of what's most important and what can solve maybe 80% of potential problems, and I tried to give you the tool which can be used even today. So you hear something now and you are able to use it today. It was my pleasure to be here with you, enjoy Football Science Institute course, and looking forward to seeing you in future.